What is something that you regret? Now, regret is a feeling of sadness or remorse or disappointment over something that happened or something you did. Hi, Jessica and Tamara. I think that we all as humans have regrets, but I think that a lot of people with ADHD have an extra amount of regrets, and that has to do with struggling with, impulse control or emotional control, and other kinds of as well as other kinds of productive executive functioning skills that have to do with uh, productivity, excuse me, and it has to do with some things that have to do with our social challenges. So Jessica says, I regret becoming an addict. That's very brave. Thank you, Jessica, for starting us off on a deep level. Tamara, the mess that my finances became is my biggest ADHD regret. Okay, so we have becoming an addict, some financial challenges, anything else that people are regretting today. I'm regretting um, uh, how I was dysregulated when I went through menopause. I really did not handle myself well, and even though I was getting support, I caused pain to my family, particularly my younger child, and I have a lot of regret around that, and it's hard, honestly, to forgive myself for it. I'm working on it because I know, I was a participant in a dynamic in a system. It wasn't all my fault. I was a player, but it sure feels terrible. So let's see. What else do we have? Lulu, not leaving a long-term relationship sooner so as to not be hurting the other person, stayed 6 years too long. Jessica, I regret not being able to control my behaviors and attitude growing up or being able to self-regulate. Okay. Um, Tamara can relate. Maria, I regret not taking more time to really figure out the right career path more. So when we have these regrets, what we're talking about are choices that we made that we may have made consciously or unconsciously, but some of these choices were actually choices that hurt us. Um, Thank you, Tamara. Yes, and so there's a way in which we can self-sabotage because we have these things that we can't really control, and no one is actually helping us learn how to control them or acknowledge that they need to be controlled. And certainly, how things are now in the science is very different than how it was 10 years ago. So we have a lot of adults with and without ADHD, but since we're a community of people with ADHD, regrets for things that we've done. But we also have regrets for things we wish we had done, missed opportunities. And I think one of the challenges is that we can't go back. And I don't know about you, but I really want to. Like, I mean, I think I still beat myself up about some bad moments, and it's hard to really remember, like, I was part of an environment. It wasn't all me, but it was a lot me. And so I think that we have the opportunity to share some of that with ourselves, but also to pivot because the past is behind us. We can't do anything about it. We have to learn how to accept, forgive, and pivot and change. So I see some really amazing and deep comments here. So I want to just scroll up, please. Facebook, let me scroll up. Okay. Tamara, perimenopause and emotional dysregulation is what helped lead me to a diagnosis last year. Susan, not being invited to parties when I was younger, never asked to dance. Maria, I was impulsively influenced to pick the career. Cassandra, welcome. I'm discovering that I have fearful avoidant attachment style and have had part in the breakdown relationships I lost in the past. I wish I would have figured out sooner. I'm working on changing through EMDR. Right, EMDR is a wonderful treatment for regret, eye movement desensitization reprogramming, because it actually addresses the neural pathways in our brain so we can try to shift patterns. If you were raised in a high conflict family, and I was, I learned that pattern. I've absorbed that pattern. I act it out unconsciously because I'm kind of comfortable with it. I've learned this about myself just this week. I've been focusing on it. And, I wish I didn't. But I have personally found EMDR to be very helpful. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think there can be a fine line between the things that we've done, but also the regret, but also a kind of persistent trauma. So one of the things about living with ADHD is the trauma of 1,000 little paper cuts. The ways in which you miss things, the ways in which you made mistakes, the ways in which how people treated you, or maybe you had parents who had untreated ADHD and you lived in a family that wasn't exactly built for the kind of wiring you are, particularly if you're a sensitive person. So what happens is with regret is that it also often brings along shame. And so, we know that that shame is just, really just putting ourselves down into a deep hole of about the way that we've lived or the mistakes that we've made. It's not just guilt, I wish I could have done better. It's I'm a bad person because I did those things. And so it's worth taking a minute when you're thinking about this topic of regret or, its friend shame, to examine the coping skills that you adopted as a young person to survive in the family that you came from, or in the neighborhood where you grew up, or the school you went to. That there is, there's a sort of a sensitivity, a sensibility of how we're wired, but then there's also the environmental factors. And with, insight-oriented work, cognitive behavioral in combination with cognitive behavioral work or something like EMDR or emotional freedom technique tapping or something else, you can learn to sort of rewire yourself and change your behavior by mindfully adopting new skills. So this is where mindfulness is so important. Repeated trauma paves certain kinds of pathways in our brain. And those people with ADHD who've had a lot of these 1,000 little paper cuts of traumatic experiences, or felt like they were off, or just received a lot of criticism or negativity, all of this actually programs our brain and can sort of contribute to how we're responding in situations that can then, of course, breed regret and honestly self-loathing and then some shame. Jane Kirkwood, totally relate about menopause. My family really suffered with my emotional dysregulation too. Yeah, it's like, I wish I knew more then. Safia, I now know why I couldn't last in relationships. Maria, I'm not officially diagnosed. I try to get tested, but not sure how to do that. Let us know where you're from, Maria. I'll try to help you. Dana, welcome. I get what you're talking about about ADHD and menopause. I was so mean to my parents, and they passed away during those years. And I think there was recently, a very well-received a seminar here, a webinar on ADHD and menopause that it sounds like a lot of us should take a look at. Alethea, overreacting to things. Tamara, career path is a huge regret, missed opportunities. Maria, Althea, I can relate massively. Shirley, just joining you. Welcome, Shirley. Richie, EMDR is good. It is. Jennifer, I'm struggling ever since I turned 40. I also started a new job after 6 years in my old one, and I am just paralyzed. How do I go about getting diagnosed and finding someone who is able to handle both therapy, coaching, and potential meds? So that's an interesting question, Jennifer, and I'll answer that question. So getting a diagnosis may actually occur from a therapist could do a diagnosis, a psychiatrist or a nurse prescriber could do a diagnosis, sometimes your primary care doctor, although they may not be as thorough as you might like. You can see a psychologist or a neuropsychologist for an evaluation, which we call testing sometimes. That can be helpful, but often those people don't necessarily all do everything. So you may have a therapist and you may have a prescriber. and the person who did the evaluation can be a third person. So it can be complicated, but it is important to pursue, a pretty thorough diagnosis. I also want to say that emotional reactivity can be part of ADHD, but it can also be part of a trauma background. So if you're sensitive, if you don't have great emotional control or emotional regulation to start with, you never maybe learned those skills in your family, and then there was a lot of trauma in your family, whether it was a lot of yelling or conflict or drinking or abuse, your reactivity is going to be much faster and stronger than someone who didn't grow up in that kind of environment. Maria, oh yeah, self-shame added onto by excessive shame from the people around you is great. Yeah, really great. Jane, my coping strategies were to run away from things and people. Maria, you're in British Columbia, Canada. So I don't know what the national health system is in Canada in terms of how it works with diagnosis, but I would assume that your primary care physician would be able to give you some referrals about how you would go about doing this. And if not, I would check out Attitude for their referral base, and I would also look at CHADD, CHADD, or ADDA, ADDA. These are organizations of people with ADHD. I just want to put in the comment here, I'm giving a free downloadable on shame. I think that's very relevant to what we're talking about, so please, click that link, go to my website and download it, and I hope it will help you. Susan, menopause not for the faint of heart. Preach it, sister. Thank you. High five. Lulu, I'm in the same boat as Jennifer. Okay, so it's important when you want to get diagnosed to try to get some referrals, and this really means talking to a lot of different people and seeing whose names keep coming up and perhaps how long you're going to have to wait. Hi, Elizabeth. Glad you're here. I'll take a couple more comments and then I'll go on to the next topic. Sophia, I'm waiting for face-to-face assessment for I am being assessed for ADHD. Great. Overwhelming. Yes. ACOA related? Could be. Adult children alcoholics? Absolutely. That would be traumatic. Richie, regret is a huge issue we need to deal with. I like this topic. Thank you, Richie. Rhonda, quite bite back. Okay. Jessica, yes, I grew up with not learning to self-regulate, grew up in a broken home with tons of chaos and constant verbal and physical abuse, so that's where my issues stem from. Of course, and if you're sensitive already, it's going to be even harder for you to learn how to regulate because you don't have a model for that. Let's see. Elizabeth, getting on the Facebook webinar was so difficult because it wasn't a link to tab. Steps are difficult, I see. Thank you for sharing. Tracy, I grew up with a lot of that. I still don't feel like I belong at 64. Well, you belong here, Tracy. Welcome. Jane, hi. My daughter got her diagnosis of ADHD at 20. Amanda, hi. All right, so let's go back a little bit. So when I was thinking about how do you deal with regret, I came up with this 4 R's. And the 4 R's are radical awareness. So we're going to look at what our thwarted dreams were or our shameful actions, and we're going to name them. We are going to take it head on. And I'm going to type this into the chat so you have these 4 R's because I haven't written anything about this. This is sort of something I just created and I want you to know it. So radical awareness. We're going to think about, what are things that we regret? What are things that where we feel remorse or disappointment? What are some dreams that I wish I had that I hadn't done? And we're going to name those and we're going to be honest with ourselves about it. The next thing is to recognize. Okay, and recognize what was going on in your life at that time, and the environment, psychologically, socially, school, work, family. We don't live in a petri dish. We actually live in connection with other people. And so, when things kind of go down the rabbit hole, we're part of that, but we're not the only reason it's gone down the rabbit hole. And I think for people with ADHD who receive a lot of negative comments over the course of their childhood, they naturally take on blame. And if you lived in a family where people blamed you and told you you were wrong, you're either going to take that on, or you're going to fight back the way you fought back as a child. Either way, it's not going to help. It's not going to necessarily reduce the regret. But what we want to do is we want to have radical awareness. Yep, I did that. I wish I hadn't done that. I have some regrets about this thing. We're going to recognize what was going on in my life at that time. What was the environment I was living in? Who were the players? What was happening with me psychologically and socially and financially, or, where was I experiencing racism or homophobia, anything like that. So then the third R is to repair. Okay. Now, you can't go backwards. I think there was a line from there was this wonderful line from The Lion King, which is, we say in English, you put the past behind you. But in The Lion King, one of the characters says, put your behind in the past. And I just think that is hilarious and so true. It's like, stop putting your behind in the past, right? That's what you do. You're sort of planted in the past. And we want to plant you in the present, okay? In the present. And the only way you're going to be able to plant yourself in the present is to repair, to make amends, to listen to feedback, and to own what is yours. What are you accountable for? Okay, so that is repair. And the final R is reconfigure. Okay, this means you are going to pivot. You're going to reconfigure. You're going to work on changing how you respond to things, shifting your attitude, and reducing your reactivity. And that can be a lifetime practice. I know it is for me. It is. These are things. I can kind of sink into a dark place. I can be reactive when I feel like people are pushing my buttons. I can be overly sensitive. And these are not my best qualities. Like the fact that I'm even telling them to you, I'm going to get off the Facebook Live and be like, whoa, maybe a shame spiral. I hope not, but the doors of vulnerability are a little open here. I want you to be able to be vulnerable here. I want you to think about, how can I reconfigure my responses? What is the non-typical response that I can make? And how can I support myself in making that choice? We need less shame and more self-compassion, and that includes forgiveness. So let's see what's going on here. I feel like I'm, let's see. Okay, great. Thanks for you guys for putting that in. It's hard to look back and realize that we screwed up. It is really hard to do that, okay? It's like basically pouring salt on a little, a cut you have from shaving your legs or your face or whatever, it hurts. It hurts. And we may not be able to fix it because we can't, go back and fix it. We can only make a change for now and moving forward. But what we can't do is expect ourselves to be perfect as we attempt to make those changes. You can't do it. Nobody is. So we have to figure out how to navigate. I'm efforting. It's one of my favorite words. It's in my book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew. How to effort and how to accept myself that I'm going to stumble along the way. So we want to think about what we're thinking about here is developing different neural pathways by developing different responses. Okay. So let's see what we have. Let's see. Okay. Um, repair, okay. Repair. Maria, I am still blamed for all the problems in my mother and siblings' lives and health. I am so sorry. That leaves me feeling that leaves me that that me leaving is the solution, though they never dealt with the issues, even if I attempt to work on our other issues. So this is a really hard thing because we can't make other people do our work. We can't make other people do their work. We can only work on ourselves. And as we change in a system, we can hope that the system changes. But you don't know, and it's a big risk. Cassandra, I grew up in a enmeshed family with an alcoholic father, and my mom was raised in a chaotic household. As much as they tried to force me into the box, they needed me to be in the box they needed me to be in, excuse me, to make their life easier. I kept pushing back. I wanted to be myself and be accepted for who I was. It never really happened. I became the scapegoat. I took a lot of blame for a lot of things because I was a squeaky wheel. I was the only one taken to therapy, and that's where I got the ADHD diagnosis. I was already much older by then, and nobody helped me to understand that what having ADHD meant. I just knew it made life difficult. It took me 25 years to accept the difference and stop feeling shame for how it affects my life. Jennifer, easier said than done to change reactions and attitude, especially when we don't have the ability to regulate and decide behavior in the moment. It occurs to us afterward. Yes, Jennifer, and there is a tip for that. And this is a tip that is really, really important. When you start to feel dysregulated, you must take a pause. You must take a pause. It is the hardest thing to do. I'm not always very good at it because sometimes things can happen in a flash. It's like that light, the light switch just flips, and you're down into like some place you really don't want to go. So I think it's important that if things occur to you afterwards, to start a list on your phone of things that trigger you and responses. We want to start to build awareness of our triggers rather than blame ourselves for it, so that we can have a plan when they come up. Okay. Thank you very much for saying that. I have a real estate in the shoulda, woulda, coulda land, bad investment. Yeah, Maria, Cassandra, that had to be so traumatizing. People love to blame the person with mental health issues and make them the scapegoat to avoid their blame. I agree. Cassandra, I'm working on talking to the little girl in me and telling her that none of it was her fault and loving her the way she needed to be loved. Good for you. That's fabulous. I think that's really you're on the right track. Jessica, I agree. When we can reconfigure, it's important to take responsibility for our part. Distinguish what is ours and others. Then establish boundaries, what you have control over, and then give ourselves compassion, forgive others, and forgive ourselves, of course. That would be really great. Hold on a second. Which leads to empowerment. Yes, I love this. Oh, thank you. Okay. Efforting is versus horribilizing. Yeah, horribilizing is really not a good thing. I'm not really into that. I'd love to hear what horribilizing means to you. Dana, what if you grew up in a loving home, but parents and siblings never talked about their emotion or showed them, or we were always supposed to act like everything was okay in that generation? A lot of us grew up in that generation, and that was really hard if we were truth seers. If we could see that there's, stuff going on all the time, but, once it's all behind closed doors, that's really difficult. Dana, this was my hubby, and he doesn't know how to emotionally connect or regulate some emotions. So true. Alexander, I'm 56, and you have described me and the pattern of my whole life, as are all you texters. Well, I'm so glad you're here. Dysregulation, what is that? It's actually with a Y, Susan. It's DYS, and it's being out of control. It's instead of regulating, you are dysregulated. You are unregulated. Amy, I'm trying to learn how to process my emotions without sabotaging my health. That's great. Richie, someone I love just passed away. I made many mistakes in the relationship. I feel really bad. I can't fix the past. Since she is no longer here, I cannot fix now. Please advise. Any advice? I have a difficult time to forgive myself. You know, Richie, what I would do is I would actually meditate and imagine her face, and I would continue to ask her for forgiveness while you're meditating. Talk to her about what's in your heart, and I would do that a little bit every day because you are asking her, you want to ask her for something, and I believe that maybe in a dream she'll come to you with a smile or a flower, or you'll have a dream about, you're eating dinner at a restaurant, and that'll be, a little healing for you. And but I think it is important to have some time every day where you close your eyes and you imagine her and you ask for forgiveness for the things that have hurt you, that you've done and that you regret. Let's see. Hi, Lynn. Nice to see you. Nope, you can't go in the past. Maria, working on it in therapy, but definitely not easy. I tend to be my own worst enemy. I tend to get very defensive, something I dislike about myself. Okay, I got it. You're doing the best you can there, Maria. Let's see, Elizabeth, my brother coined that term, horribilizing. Can you define it for me? Because I'm really curious about it. All right, so we want to develop some new pathways. How are we going to do that? Well, first, of course, we're going to acknowledge now when we struggle. What are we struggling with? And what is perhaps triggering, and what is a solution that when we're not stressed in the moment, that we come up with, that we could apply in the future, because all the situations are different and you're never going to be able to solve them. All you can do is manage to slow things down when you're feeling dysregulated, so you can say, whoa, you know what, I need a minute to think about it. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Or, hey, I'll get back to you. Or, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. So that you buy yourself some time. Because if you can't buy yourself that time, like the worst thing for anybody, a family or a couple or whatever, is to have an argument in a car. Because when you're in a car, you can't necessarily get out of the car. If you're in a house, you can say, time out, I'll see you in 30 minutes. I'm going to go take a walk or go to the grocery store. I'm changing my environment so that I can change my mood and my reactivity. But when you're in a car, you can't do that. When you're, on a bus or a plane or wherever, if you're at the family dinner table at your in-laws' house, it's a lot harder to do that. So you then have to either say, hey, can you pull over? Or just put your headphones on and say, I'm taking a time out. Or, say, I've got to go to the bathroom and, make that happen. Okay. So, then we want to think about, in terms of dealing with regret, what would help us do it differently? Like, what would help us reconfigure? Is there a repair I need to make to say to someone? Is there a particular part of my behavior that I want to work on? Do I need alerts, alarms, reminders on my phone, or a banner that goes across my computer, or post-its telling me that I can do something that I'm not sure I can do, or I can say something, or people make mistakes. That's what makes them human. Something that's going to help us really shift. And then, of course, before we want to, before we go to bed, we want to really do that exercise of 3 things that went well that day, because regret can kind of pile up into a general sense of disappointment and negativity about your life. And we want to try to pay attention to the things that are going pretty well. So I see some notes here. Let me go back. Elizabeth, okay. Elizabeth, sure, it's making a bigger thing out of a normal problem that may not be. I see, I see. Okay, so it's making a bigger thing out of something that may not be a big thing at all. That's what horribleizing is. Okay. We also can call that catastrophizing. Um, okay. Richie, good advice. I actually had a dream. She was happy to see me in the dream. Oh, she was nice. It was me who's having the problem of forgiving myself. So there are a lot of really wonderful, good self-forgiveness meditations. You can check Insight Timer. You could go to Headspace. There's a traditional Hawaiian meditation around self-forgiveness. It has a very long name, which I can't pronounce, so I'm not even going to try. I think it's called Ho'oponopono or something. I'm so embarrassed. I can't pronounce it. But that's really where the work is, because if you had a dream and she was happy to see you, then she has forgiven you. So why is it that you can't forgive yourself? And that's a good thing to ask here. What makes it hard for us, you or me, not to forgive ourselves? Lynn, I struggle greatly when I am triggered by cancer commercials or anything cancer or death. I go to, why did God take my 14-year-old Sam? Yeah, but that question is not a healing question. That's a shutting down question. It's a question you're never going to know the answer to. It doesn't make any sense, like why some person is still alive, wreaking havoc in the world and is terrorizing an entire country, and why your 14-year-old Sam is not here. Like, there's no logic for that. And so we can't really go down that path, even though I understand why you might want to. Cassandra, I'm working on identifying why I'm feeling dysregulated. That's great. I'll excuse myself from the room and analyze what I'm feeling. Usually I'm feeling dismissed, rejected, or out of control. I'm having a little trouble saying this. And I do breathing exercises to calm myself down. Fantastic. That is great. Let's see. Okay. Jessica, I do a thought tracker method. This is how I'm learning not to repeat certain triggers. So what I do is, after the incident, I write down in a small journal what happened, where was I, what did it remind me of, is this a pattern from my past, how did it feel in my body, how did it respond or react. Let's see. And how can I do better next time? Wow, that's amazing. And I think you should just come take over my job, because that's just so fabulous. I love it all. And that's a great tool to offer all of us. Thank you. I think I will make sure that I put that in the blog that I write, so that other people could use it. Thank you so much for sharing. That's a great tool. Let's see. Amy, excuse me. My mom is a very toxic person. My brothers and sisters are able to tolerate her and accept her. However, she triggers me and I have to block her out completely. I wish I had more patience to deal with her without completely closing the door. Yeah, that's a loss for you. I can see how that's a regret. Cassandra, it's really difficult for me to express my feelings and be vulnerable. It's very difficult for me to ask for help. Which makes me feel frustrated when I do need help. This is one area that is difficult to change. Yeah, it's hard to ask for help, I think particularly if other people see you as very capable, they're not so willing to kind of imagine that you're someone who needs help. So that's tough. But it is important. And I think it's important to find some areas, even if it's just one or two, where you can ask for help comfortably, and who you're asking is important also. Lynn, after the death, a couple of years later, after Sam, my dad and I had a situation with my mom that is nothing new. She left him in the hospital by himself to die overnight. However, I went and stayed with him till the end. At this point, I have set boundaries and I don't see her anymore. So what I'm hearing are some regrets about parental estrangement, that you've had to set limits with parents who were not, excuse me, I'm not sure what happened here. Sorry, that you've had to set limits with parents who were not understanding of you or respectful of you. And, and I think that's a hard choice. And I think it's hard for everybody because it's hard on the parents. It's hard on the parents and it's hard for you. Let's see. Safia, counseling has helped so much. I talk about my struggles and we talk about what I can try and do instead. That's great. That's really wonderful to know. Let's see. Lynn, exactly. I go down for a week with this. Maria, oh my God, yes, it's very consuming emotionally. You are definitely more successful than I am at walking away. Not so successful. Really bad with not saying things before I think them out. It's literally out of my mouth before I can think it through. It gets me in trouble frequently. Planning to talk to my therapist in our next session. Great. Jessica, of course. And yes, add it for people. Thank you. Same here. I end up upsetting others and I don't mean to. Hi, Dorothea, Biloxi. Nice to have you. Dale, Lynn, I've been there. I would love to talk to you about how I healed and how God has used my son's death for good. Great. I hope you guys can connect. Lynn, she was a gaslighter. Tracy, I had a dream last night that I could not protect my younger sibling who suicided. And I warned her adult kids that she would do that. I feel like I should have been the protector in our abusive childhood. You know, Tracy, I just want to give you a hug because your younger sibling was hurting and you warned her kids that she would do something like that. And, you know, you did your part. I think, you know, sometimes it's hard to separate out our sadness and our grief from our level of responsibility. Thank you for sharing that. Susan, parents are people too. Some are broken. Yeah, it's true. Parents are people and some are broken and some can be fixed and some can't be. Lynn, I don't see my twin sister either. I'm sorry. Absolutely upset my BFF, diagnosed ADHD because I got too much TMI with her information with other people unintentionally and forgot what I shouldn't say. I hear you about that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit before we stop about some tools. So when we think about self-compassion, the goal is to shift from proving yourself, from judging yourself as less than, from seeing yourself as someone who has messed up and is unworthy, to accepting yourself, accepting that you did the best you could in a given moment with the resources you had available to you. And those resources may have been very, very limited. And that doesn't mean you're a bad person or you're flawed. It just means that you didn't have those resources for whatever reason. You're not wired that way. You weren't taught them. You forgot something. It's important to try to remember that in a moment when people are flooded, we can't do anything other than what we can do in that moment to keep our head above water. And sometimes it doesn't stay above water, right? So one of the things that helps is to set some realistic goals for yourself around those 4 R's. You know, really take some time, copy them down again. And Annie, if you could just put the 4 R's in one comment, that would be great. So that you could take some time and really think about them. So we want to remember to practice self-compassion, to notice when you're making efforts to do things differently and to use things as a learning experience. One of the things that's so frustrating for so many people with ADHD is that or even people who don't have ADHD, when we're trying to make a change, we are so aware of the change we're trying to make. Like, whoa, look at that. I didn't blurt anything out that time. I thought about it, but I didn't. I didn't do, I actually did my breathing exercise and I held it together. course, no one's really noticing that, but I'm noticing that. In a way, what we want is for someone to kind of notice how the efforting that we're making. And unfortunately, that just doesn't happen a lot. I'm just putting my downloadable in again for you. It doesn't happen. Like, we're trying, and yet people don't see when we're trying. Like, because there's this backloaded of all the stuff that has not been ideal or our best selves, right? So, so we want to remember to hold on to the power of yet, right? The power of yet. I haven't mastered this yet. I may never master this, but I'm efforting towards it. And that's what's really important for you to remember. You are efforting towards the yet, towards the mastery of the yet, towards the mastery of the yet. I'm going to say it that way because why not? So that's a fundamental growth mindset, which is like, I'm trying, I'm going to get some feedback, maybe that didn't work so well, and I'm going to try again. Cassandra, this is why it was easier for me to forgive my parents. They are victims of their dysfunctional parents. Yes, they are. And going to therapy wasn't an option in their generation. Now I'm focused on healing my own trauma and working to break the generational trauma for your kids. Good for you. High five, man. That's incredible. Good for you. So again, we want to kind of have some reminders for the different activation levels. You know, there's sort of the baseline, which we could say is a beautiful blue. And then we might have what I call disturbance in the field. That might be a little bit of maybe a purple, and then we might have activation, and that might be maybe a pink, and then we have, you know, basically code red, that alert kind of situation. So we want to try to intervene with our regrets and our dysregulation in the purple and the pink phase before it gets to that red. Maybe I'll just put it as orange, code orange or something. So, but something that, you know, is really, you know, really intense. And because when you're that activated, you know, the only thing that you really need to do is to calm your body down. But before then, you can use some thinking and some tools to help you. And so I think in a calm moment, I would like you to think about, you know, what are some ways that I can create a code for myself, like what are different levels, and you could use mine, of course. What are ways that I notice that I'm being, you know, I'm triggered. Either I'm triggered by regret, I'm triggered by sadness, I'm triggered by remorse, I'm triggered by shame. What's happening in my body when that happens? And how am I coping with those signals? Because you have to have a coping plan for you before you can make amends for someone else. You have to cope first, and then you can make amends for someone else. Amy says, let's see, I didn't find out that I had ADHD until my son was diagnosed. At age 4. They were eager to start him on medication. However, it's been challenging for me to get to them at times. Is there a double standard when it comes to medicating children with ADHD versus adults? It's different. Okay, there's, you know, I think there's generally a lot of research about children, and there is more research about ADHD, but in adults, but the diagnostics process is just not as clear as it is for kids, and that can be troubling for many adults. Lynn, the older generation was raised with the mentality that they don't talk about their problems with anyone. Going to therapy is a sign of weakness. That mentality of we don't talk about what happens in the family with anyone else. is what has damaged a whole generation. I'm so thankful that it's changing. Oh yeah, that's not this generation. They talk to people, which is great. Annabelle, I use music to help me cope. Wonderful. Um, my mother, let's see, what is this? My mother has therapy. But she refuses to go because she hates talking. She hates taking responsibility for what she does wrong and her toxic behaviors and lies. She went one time when we were kids, but immediately stopped when she was called out on her toxic behaviors. Yeah. Some people are not willing to face their dragons. They're just not. And we can't make them. We just have to protect ourselves. And that's really sad. I think that would really be, a reason why you are not in relationship with her anymore. We'll take a couple more comments and then we'll stop for today. So does my boyfriend, Abby. Regret and its sister, self-pity and negativity. I connect this with my ADHD diagnosis at 62. Let's see. I'm having a little trouble reading that, so hold on a second. Yes, I regret my uncompleted goals, etc. Only since my diagnosis have I chosen a positive focus, treating myself with kindness, reframing uncompleted goals, indecisiveness with praise. I've been able to see that I've taken chances that others haven't taken when on a narrow road. Intentionally past has included all sorts of approaches, ACT, DBT, 12 steps meditation, art, nature, CHAD support group, concerted, yay, parallel work, brain done, aka brain deposit. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Jessica, yes, knowing our triggers and practicing coping first. Love all this. Thank you. You're welcome. Same, Maria. Blue is my favorite color, like the sky or ocean, peaceful. Then that's your baseline. Insight timer is amazing. It is, isn't it? Okay, Cassandra, getting diagnosed as an adult is hard because you tend to answer the questions based on your coping mechanisms. Oops, sorry, hold on a second. You tend to answer the questions based on your coping mechanisms rather than realizing you had to do so much to establish those coping mechanisms to function. You would have to answer. You have to answer as you would without using a coping mechanism. Yes, that's right, because kids haven't developed the coping mechanism, so they just answer as is. It's a little bit easier for them. Thank you. Therapy for anything is great. A problem shared is definitely a problem halved. Oh, that is so lovely. I love that. That's great. That is really nice. I'm going to use that too. Okay, unfortunately, I live with her, my mother, and not by choice, but by financial reasons, it's harder. Yes, so set some boundaries, Maria. I hope that you can work outside of the house. The best thing is nature and music. I couldn't agree more. Music, way too impulsive. Typing. Regret is so hard. I was screaming in my dream last night, feeling betrayed. I'm sorry. I just want to say a massive thank you for your amazing life. You're so helpful. You are so welcome. Oh my gosh, look at the time. I'm going to say thank you to all of you. I hope that you'll be able to practice those 4 R's, and I'm just going to repeat them before we leave so you have them. I'm just scrolling up in my document. Give me a second. Those 4 R's: radical awareness, recognize, repair, and reconfigure. It's a blessing to be here with all of you. I won't be here next week. I'll be traveling, but I'll be back the following week. Have a good 2 weeks, and I'll see you soon. Thanks. I hope you have a great weekend. Bye-bye.